here to pull this present. Okay, got that. And let's just see. As Terry mentioned, my association with Algonquin Park goes back a couple of years. In fact, it's 50 years this month since I began to work in Algonquin as a naturalist. It's sort of an anniversary year for me, rather major one, 50 years, my goodness. But I went to Algonquin Park more than 50 years ago, actually. My parents brought me there as a very small child. I'm not sure whether I was feeding the deer or I was being fed to the deer. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, but that's me. I was indeed a little deer, wasn't I? Then I began to work in 1972, and a lot of you know the people in the canoe with me. In the stern is Ron Tozer, famous park naturalist and a phenomenal birder and author of The Birds of Algonquin Park. And in the middle is Bill Crins, Dr. Bill Crins, who just retired from Natural Resources a few years ago now. And so there we are, paddling on the Petawawa River at Lake Travers. And I go back to Algonquin Park at every opportunity. And to be quite honest, it's my favorite place on this planet, and it always puts a smile on my face. So it's a place I go for many, many reasons. And one reason is the incredible biodiversity Algonquin holds. 1,100 species of vascular plants. Many are spectacular, of course, in terms of beauty, like wild iris. And you can see why Van Gogh loved wild irises so much. They are spectacular flowers. And the flowers range from beautiful to fascinating, like the sundew, roundleaf sundew that devours insects. Almost 100 species of damselflies and dragonflies are in the park. So virtually every single group of plants and animals you want to look at are certainly found in Algonquin. These are ebony jewel wings laying eggs. Algonquin's famous for its mammal diversity, and these range from wonderful weasels like the American marten to the mighty moose, and one of my favorites, the very elusive eastern wolf. Also, of course, birds. Of course, birds are what many of you are enjoying right now. Well, not at this very moment, but certainly at this time of year. And many are iconic birds like bald eagles, now very common in the park as nesting birds. Of course, iconic birds include our common loon, and every single lake of any size certainly has at least one pair of loons. But what really drives birders to go to Algonquin is to see these northern birds that do not occur farther south. Things like spruce grouse, here seen devouring tamarack needles just before they change color. Things like boreal chickadees do not breed farther south in Canada, for that matter. And we have the wonderful gray jay. Oops, I can see Terry's forehead frowning there. The bird's name is no longer gray jay, of course, it's Canada jay. How do I forget that every time? And by the way, you know why they call the bird now the Canada jay? That's because this bird is so damn patriotic. And it carries flags, by the way, for the right reason, as we saw in Ottawa there a couple of months ago. And why these northern aspects to Algonquin? Well, the main reason is its elevation. Algonquin lies on an ancient dome of rock that actually was higher at one time than today's Himalayas. And this elevation, which includes some of the highest elevations in Ontario, 600 meters above sea level, give it cooler temperatures through the year. And this allows for the formation of northern flora and therefore northern habitats and therefore northern birds. So that makes the park really special because the northern elements that are not found farther south. And these elements, of course, include these beautiful black spruce peatlands. For those of you who know Tom Thompson's Northern River, he captured the mood that these northern elements certainly bring to the park. And that's where you find these northern residents in spots like this. And these northern residents include blackback woodpeckers. And in fact, there are a number of northern animals that don't occur farther south, that don't get much acclaim unless you are looking, for example, at butterflies. This McCown's Arctic, for example, the southernmost population in Canada resides in Algonquin's eastern side near Lake Travers. And by the way, they fly every 2 years as adult butterflies and only on even numbered years. So this year, and they start flying by the middle to latter part of May. This is the year to go see them if you're looking for McCown's Arctics in Algonquin Park. And other species too, like this common branded skipper. Now, the elevation also brings moving water. 7 major rivers start in Algonquin, and some flow east, like the Petawawa here at Poplar Rapids. Some flow north, like the Amable du Faux. Some flow west, like the Oxtongue. Some flow south, like the York. So rivers start in the park, and because it's on a dome, flow in different directions. Pretty remarkable. There's lots of still water too. More than 1,000 named lakes are in Algonquin. And of course, there are myriad more small ponds. The larger bodies of water, for example, like Lake Travers here, sorry, this is Grand Lake, support common loons and common mergansers. Well, the smaller bodies of water, the ponds, and there's countless ponds in the park with these great moods in late summer when the mists descend on them, often created by beavers, house another set of flora and fauna. And some ducks like ringneck duck, for example, nest there not much farther south in Ontario. And these ponds have some really neat animals. Mink are very common in the park. These are 3 young ones that I squeaked in. Was it last year, 2 years ago? Gosh, time just sort of blends together. And of course, these ponds also have lots of river otters. So lots of life in Algonquin and all the different habitats. And that really is why we naturalists love going to Algonquin. It's for this incredible diversity that range from hardwood hills that turn blazing colors in the fall down to the lower elevations where you have black spruce and balsam fir peatlands, just a remarkably diverse area. And the park's also very different from west to east. The western side has the highest elevations, rolling hills, again, some of the highest elevations in Ontario. And these are cloaked in hardwood forest largely. Sugar maple is a dominant tree with some yellow birch and black cherry and American beech components too. And of course, these forests are famous for turning these remarkable colors in the autumn and drawing thousands of people every year to enjoy the color. And in the understory, you find the typical hardwood species like red trillium. By the way, white trilliums are extremely rare in Algonquin. I've never actually seen one in the park. But there is another trillium that I do really enjoy looking at, and that's the painted trillium, quite common through the park. And of course, there's a canopy overhead, and once the canopy opens up, these flowers vanish. But the canopy houses things like scarlet tanagers, very common nesters in the park. And down below, of course, eastern chipmunks, which thrive on maple, keys, and other products of the forest as well. Now, the eastern side is quite a bit different. It's lower in elevation by about 200 meters, and it has a very dry substrate because a glacial river that drained glacial Lake Algonquin about 10,000 years ago left behind a lot of sand. And sand is porous, does not hold water very well. So therefore, the eastern side has a bit of a rain shadow effect caused by the Western Highlands, but also it's got sand as a large part of the soil base. And therefore, it's much drier, and pines thrive in that. And so most of the eastern side of the park is covered in pine forests, white, red, and in some areas, jack pine. And underneath these coniferous trees, a different set of flora. Pink lady slippers are abundant. And by the way, whenever I see this scene of pink lady slippers, I get kind of almost sad. It's like these 2 flowers are breaking up. They're holding petals or shedding tears. Maybe I'm spending too much time in Algonquin Park looking at flowers. I'm not sure. One of the more interesting flowers for its appearance, so you find in the pine forest, is Pipsissewa. These flowers point downward, so you have to get underneath them or tilt them backwards to see their really unusual configuration that is designed to be pollinated by bees. The pine forests are habitat for pine warblers, one of the most common birds in eastern Algonquin. And of course, red squirrels love eating the seeds inside the cones of conifers, and they are abundant too, but they vary in numbers as the size of the cone crop varies as well. Now, even though the east side is lower in elevation and generally flatter, less hilly than the western side, there is a spectacular piece of geology there, and that is the Barren Canyon, the Barren River Canyon. And there's a trail on top spectacular view, no guardrails. It's about a mile long and about 100, oh, it's 100 meters sheer drop, so about 300 feet sheer drop down to the bottom. Canoeing through the canyon is spectacular. You go back in time, you see these ancient Precambrian rock, about 2 billion years old. But the rock is different here than other parts of Algonquin, because on these rocks, there's a little bit of lime that percolates out of the crevices, and that allows lime-loving organisms to live there. Things like sunburst lichen, and many ferns that are calciphilic. There's fragile fern, fragrant fern, and others like purple stem cliffbreak are found there, nowhere else. And a plant that loves calcium-rich soils, poison ivy, rare in the park, but fairly common in the Barren River Canyon. And I love going there to see these unusual plants, but also to see the birds that nest on the cliff faces as they did thousands of years ago. Can you see the nest here? And if I use my cursor, which seems to have almost vanished, here it is on the middle right of the screen. There's a nest right here. And that is an eastern phoebe nest, nesting in the crevice. And this particular day, we found 5 active nests in the canyon. And that young, a little closer view might help you out. The young are about to fledge. So they are nesting there. Barn swallows used to nest, no longer. It's been at least, I think, 15 years since one built a nest in the park. They've declined so dramatically, as they have all through their range. But peregrine falcons are now nesting in the Barren Canyon. They have now for about half a dozen years, as well as other cliff faces in the park as well. And I love either being in the canoe and looking up, as I was here for this peregrine, or being on top of the canyon to watch the food transfer. Here's the male dropping off a sandpiper, probably a solitary sandpiper, down to the female underneath. They'll turn upside down to get it. But a couple of years ago, I was there and I saw food transfer very far away taking place. So I got a picture. Here's the male carrying something. There's a female down below screaming for the food. She's going to turn upside down. The food's being transferred. And I couldn't tell what it was till I got this image on the computer screen. And what was that? What kind of bird was that? It wasn't a bird, an eastern chipmunk. You can see the stripes here quite clearly. It's a chipmunk. Really unusual food, I think, to see a peregrine falcon transferring to its mate. And there she is receiving it now and going back to the nest. The Barren Canyon is beautiful in summer, and the Barren Canyon is beautiful in winter. And that's one thing I've always enjoyed about Algonquin, the dramatic change in seasons, not only in appearance, but also in natural history. And if you go to, say, to a pond in spring, you'll see clouds of midges as they swarm around, forming mating swarms. You go there in later summer, you'll see these beautiful mists hanging low over the water. And of course, you go there in winter, you'll see snow falling. So every season has different appearances. And I call all these things midges and mist and snowflakes seasonal accessories for the habitats. And that's the theme of the recent book, and the theme of this talk then too, is going through the seasons and to see what I perceive to be as the natural history highlights of each season. We'll start with spring. Now, normally you think of spring, well, March 21st, that's when spring really starts. But in Algonquin, if you gauge spring by the start of the nesting season of birds, you'd wind back the clocks and turn back the calendars to late February, because that is when the Canada jay begins to nest. And this photograph taken at the end of February has a bird here gathering cattail down to line its nest. And in the park, many Canada jays are on their eggs by the start of March, certainly by the end of the first week of March. And here's one taken at late February, sitting on a very cold day with snow just having fallen. And they, of course, nest early, for, as many of you know, in order to store food in the fall, late summer, fall, for the next winter that approaches. Now, another highlight in the end of February, early March, on warmer days, takes place on top of the snow. And those of you who've seen snow fleas, which are not fleas and they're not even insects, they're tiny little animals called springtails that leap 100 times their body length, you'll see little black dots. These animals are only about 2.5 millimeters long, so not much larger than pepper grain. And I was very pleased to to try to get a photograph a bit larger in size for you and for the book. And here it is. So that's 2.5 millimeters long. And here you can see the incredible strange appendage that plops down on the ice crystals, snow crystals, that springboards them into the air. That's called a furculum. And there it is, just hitting the contact of the ice. Here's something I observed, by the way, that I never read about, is that when that furcula hits the ice crystal, there are three things in the back end that pop out at the very instant. And then when you see a snow flea walking around, they're not there. They get withdrawn. And I found out eventually from the world expert in Antwerp that these they believe to be, because it's really unknown for sure, landing gear that pop out. They apparently could be sticky, and therefore when the insect tumbles around, the animal, it used to be an insect, but not anymore. When it tumbles around, it's an ice crystal. These can give it a grip. Also on the underside, between the legs, it's got another pad that inflates, that's sticky as well. And therefore it's got landing gear to ensure when they flip around in the air and land, they don't go bouncing around or sliding off ice crystals. There are larger animals too with them. This is a giant, 8 millimeters long. It's called a snow fly. It has no wings, and they wander slowly around on the snow. In summer, they're down below the snow pack, as are the springtails. And for some reason, still largely unknown, they come up to the surface and walk around. Perhaps there's better mobility. Perhaps there's food on top for them. In between in size, at 4 millimeters, is one of the most bizarre looking snow animals you can imagine, the snow scorpion fly. And these also don't fly. They live in the moss and eat mosses in summertime, but in late winter, which we call spring in Algonquin, they can appear on top of the snow with the other animals. That's the female. And that's the male with these strange appendages on the back for holding the female over his back while he mates with her. There are certain butterflies that begin to certainly appear by the end of February, early March. And these are butterflies that spent the winter as adults, hidden under crevices, often in wood. This is Compton's tortoiseshell. So these come to life early on those warmer days. And also about the same time, these butterflies start flying. Otters begin their mating process, and females do these interesting little maneuvers, little dances, I call them. And then they spread their pheromones, those lovely sex perfumes, out with their urine, and they roll in these and get lovely scents all over their bodies. And therefore they try to entice a male, for example, to mate with them. As you get through the end of February through March into April, the ice starts decaying, and on the smaller bodies of water is off and off by the middle of April or even sooner, while the bigger waters are a bit slower. But as soon as open water appears, ducks return from farther south. Virtually no ducks winter in the park. But as soon as the ice starts going off the streams, for example, hooded mergansers make an appearance. A bit later, ringnecks. And just recently we were out there, and ringnecks are still pairing up in the park. They're not quite done yet. Other ducks like buffleheads. Last time I was there was about a week and a half ago. There are buffleheads on almost every single pond in the park that we surveyed at least. But these pass through. They do not stay in nest. As the ice recedes off the lakes, beavers use that as a feeding platform. It must be for them so enjoyable to escape their lodge and the underwater world they live in below the ice, to get out and get fresh air and fresh food. By the way, were you aware that beavers, being good Canadians, wore masks during COVID?
I didn't know that.
I'm not going to explain that to you, but if you have a question in the question period, you can ask me, how did beaver get a mask on like this? By early May, the suckers start running, and they provide food for certainly larger birds like bald eagles, but also mammals like black bears. And then finally, as you get into the heart of April and start of May, the wildflower show starts, and the hardwood forests are alive with flowers by the early part of May. And these are blooming before the leaves on the trees open up. Things like trout lily, which, by the way, have two different forms. The one form has red stamens and red pollen. The other form has yellow stamens and yellow pollen. And studies have shown that it doesn't matter which kind of pollen lands on what form of flower, it still produces seeds. And so there's no rhyme nor reason that we can see for this very unusual phenomenon. Dutchman's breeches are also abundant in spring. The spring ephemerals include northern spring beauties, but there can be a penalty for blooming in Algonquin Park during the early part of May or even mid-May. And frosts and late snowfalls are not unheard of. This is 2 years ago, and these trout lilies paid a price for blooming early. Moose, for the most part, still have their winter coats on, although they can certainly have a lot of hair loss for other reasons by this time. This photograph was taken early May, the same year the flowers got nailed. The moose looks pretty content still with his coat of hair. And we had a rare sight in the park. We had great horned owls nesting in early May using an old great blue heron nest. And the female kept we weren't sure if it was young or eggs at this time, but we soon found out she had young. And you can see the snow melting here, and she's taking care. And this was 2 years ago. And that nest was not used last year, but this year, there's great horned owls again on it. As we get through May, the leaves on the tree start popping open. And of course, so does the insect life associated with them and insects in general. And out comes one of the most famous flies in Algonquin Park, the little black fly. Have you ever noticed you never have one black fly by itself biting you? There are hordes, and they often carry you away almost with their feeding frenzies. Only the females bite. And I don't use repellents. I'm not sure if you can tell that or not. But I call these biting insects, by the way, the price of admission. You know, if that's all the prices there is to pay to be out in fly season, so be it. But with the insects, of course, we turn spring birds. And there's more than 20 species of these beautiful wood warblers nest in the park, ranging from American redstarts to chestnut-sided warblers, to Blackburnian, black-throated green, Canada warbler, and then some northern ones that are more common in the boreal forest, like Cape May and Tennessee warbler, Cape May here. With the warmer weather, of course, in May brings the turtles out. And by the end of the month, the females are leaving the water to go lay their eggs. And it's a really fascinating life cycle when you consider that, you know, these females dig a hole, they drop their eggs into it. Here's a leech on the shell trying to find a wetter place in the lake where it was residing earlier. But they cover the eggs up and leave them for several months. And the soil temperature dictates what sex hatches. You know, that's really something, because most animals after mating, the sex is determined already as to what'll emerge from that egg, but not with turtles. And under really hot conditions, only females hatch. Below a certain threshold, only females, in between males and females, which means, we think about this with climate change. If we continue to have really hot summers, does that mean that only female turtles will be around in Algonquin Park until their lifespan ends? And then what? Who knows? But very few of these turtle nests, by the way, make it to a hatching stage, because many mammals, ranging from raccoons, oops, I'm freezing here. There, I froze for a sec. From raccoons to skunks that are very rare in Algonquin Park, to red foxes, love eating those eggs. And foxes in particular are so good at using their noses to smell along embankments till they finally find a nest. Then they begin to dig really quickly. I was lucky at daybreak one morning, I was tracking this fox. I was able to follow it and actually photograph it digging, pulling out the eggs one by one, slicing them open with those great canines, then licking out the contents. Not a captive fox, not a tame fox. And that brings us into summer, because turtles are done laying their eggs by the start of June, and by the official start of summer, then they're done laying eggs. Summer's the time, of course, moose are going to waterways, and ducks are raising their young. Here's a mallard and her young. And here's our ringneck again. Beavers love going to land to get fresh food. They bring it back to the water. Here's Virgin's bower being devoured by this beaver. By the way, I did a lot of research on beavers and spent many, many hours at beaver ponds working on my beaver book. And I was fascinated by the tail slap. And I think I've discovered that there's two types of tail slaps that end up in different results for the beaver. And I won't talk about that here, but one thing about tail slaps, so they certainly are communication tools to warn other beavers of potential danger and also startle predators. And when you see a tail slap, by the way, you're only seeing 2/3 of the tail if you examine the scaled part. The basal third is huge, all muscle and heavily haired, and that drives the tail. And these tail slaps I found fascinating. And just like snowflakes, every tail slap is different. I call these things beaver art. And so I'll give you a little example of beaver art that I captured in Algonquin. The big finale. These ponds that beavers inhabit also provide food for them because they love eating plants like these water lilies. And the white water lily, as well as the yellow pond lily, are really abundant in the park. And I mentioned beavers eat them. They eat the leaves, the stems, the flowers, and the underwater rhizomes. All parts of these aquatic plants are food for beavers. One of the smaller flowers that occurs in beaver ponds is water shield, named for the way the leaves have it, and the underside in the middle, they have a little stem coming down like a little shield handle. And these are fascinating flowers. You don't see the flowers that often, but you certainly see the leaves, and they can cloak certain ponds. You'll see a mink frog here making an appearance in the middle of this one. But so many little animals eat these leaves. There's various types of beetles, there are flies, and there are moths even that as caterpillars eat them. This is a water lily leaf beetle, and both the adults and the grubs eat these water shield leaves, chewing spectacular patterns as they go. And have you ever examined these patterns? They're pretty damn creative, these animals, I'll tell you. And the next one in particular, I found fascinating. I was in my canoe and looked at this, and I thought, holy cow, I see a kid's fairy tale here. I see Cinderella. Do you see Cinderella? See her smiling face, her little eyes, her little slipper, and her little foot? These guys are pretty inventive. Or have I been spending too much time in the park again? I think that's an open question for you. Well, but these water shield leaves, moose devour them. And the reason is that these leaves contain about 400 times more sodium than leaves on terrestrial plants do. All animals need sodium, and moose get most of their yearly supply by eating these water plants and storing the sodium in the room in the first part of their stomach. That's why they go to ponds, not to escape biting flies or to cool down, as earlier some reports suggested, is to get sodium. But they certainly have flies, and you don't really see these flies till a moose gets submerged. Then the flies leave the body, and when the moose comes back up, they descend on it again. These are biting insects. Both males and females bite moose and feed on skin debris as well, and they're called moose flies. Don't go to humans, don't bother us. But they don't seem to bother moose too much. In fact, the whole life cycle of this fly is tied to moose because they lay their eggs in moose droppings. Now, speaking about biting insects, of course, the park's famous for biting insects, black flies, but in summer there are mosquitoes, often in good numbers. And by the way, all these photographs are mine, and the ones you see here were taken on my own hand. I wouldn't have somebody else suffer these animals. I did it myself. And there's a mosquito. That's a deer fly. Beautiful eyes. You can identify species by their eye patterns, as you can for horse flies. That was a little tougher one to photograph. But the worst of all, the most demanding one, the greatest pains I took for a photograph was this one, stable flies. These are flies that bite your ankles and feet in a canoe. I'm sure most of you know stable flies. Both males and females bite, but they're fast and they really hurt, don't they? This was the most painful one of all those other flies. But anyways, lots of flies. Of course, flies are food for a variety of animals. Dragonflies and damselflies. Here's a stream bluet. Certainly eat them. And again, close to 100 species of dragonflies and damselflies, ranging from very common the chalk-fronted corporal, to the less common rusty snaketail that likes inhabiting those rapidy areas and streams with shallow water. Dragonflies are like birds, and they like prefer certain habitats. One of my favorites, though, is the big guy, the dragon hunter, that eats other dragonflies as its main source of food. And there are lots of problems for other dragonflies too. And by the way, all these odonates, the damselflies and dragonflies, have a unique mating system where the male sperm is transferred from his genitalia back here up to a holding chamber under his abdomen up here. And then during mating, he holds the female by the back of her head with special claspers, and she then puts her abdomen up to his receptacle here to receive the sperm, forming what's called the wheel, but I think it should be called the heart. It's rather romantic, this position, I would say. And in some species, they separate after mating. The male might try to guard the female while she lays her eggs. But in other species, as the ebony julian, other species like this calico pennant, they stay attached while the female drops her eggs in the water. But all these odonates have problems too. Birds love eating them, and especially when they first emerge from the water as a nymph case, and that splits open, and out comes a new dragonfly in a very soft, vulnerable stage called the teneral stage, which lasts for for several days in some species, but for the first, several minutes to half an hour, they may just be like this with the wings opening up. And that's when the blackbirds get them. Red-winged blackbirds and common grackles are experts at finding these dragonfly nymphs as they emerge, and they devour countless thousands of them and bring them back to feed their young. One of the highlights of summer to me is going to a sapsucker tree. I love these woodpeckers. They drill holes in spring into the xylem tissues that bring up the sap from the roots to the growing leaves. And in summer, they tap into the phloem tissues that bring the sap down from the leaves to the roots. And they make special wells that keep the wells open. And they put their bills in, of course, the tongue extracts the sap, and they bring that food back to the babies. But so many other animals go to these trees. I spent up to 8 hours a day for many days at the same tree to try to record some of the comings and goings, and there were many. Certainly hummingbirds thrive at these holes, and in fact, in early spring, that's their main source of food in Algonquin before the flowers really get going. A lot of insects come, moths and butterflies. Day-flying moth, Nessus sphinx came. Lots of vespids, lots of bald-faced hornets and yellow jackets, and lots of flies and butterflies, including this morning cloak. And here's a prize photograph of mine. One day I was at the sap tree, and this giant hornet came in, chased away the hummingbirds, came to the morning cloak. The morning cloak opened the wings, the hornet flew back. The butterfly closed its wings, the hornet flew back in. Again, the butterfly opened its wings and the hornet flew away. That's a European hornet, Vespa crabrow. First occurred, I think, in Canada, I think on the St. Lawrence in the early 70s, and is spreading slowly northward. This was the most northern record, as far as I know, in Ontario, this very photograph here in Algonquin Park. And pretty impressive hornet. They're pretty darn big. Mammals were coming. Red squirrels have a sweet tooth, or rather a sweet tongue, I guess, as do eastern chipmunks. These things are cafes, nature's cafes. And what a place to bring kids. If you want to keep, grandchildren or your own children entertained, or just go out on a date, some of you want to have a nice date, bring someone to a sapsucker tree and bring some chairs and sit there for a few hours. It's remarkable the number of animals that come during that period of time. And eventually, by later summer, the young sapsuckers have fledged. At least the ones that do fledge, because they have one major problem in Algonquin Park, and that is their nest being depredated, not by another bird, but by black bears. Doug Tozer did his PhD on sapsuckers and discovered the majority of nests that were failed were because of black bears climbing the trees and biting below the hole, eating the young. He also discovered something amazing, is that if the sapsucker build its nest in a poplar tree, say trembling aspen or large tooth poplar, where this fungus here, the bracket fungus, has softened the inside of the tree. The actual outer part of the wood remains hard, and bears have trouble biting through that. But if the woodpecker builds its nest hole in an older beech or sugar maple in the hardwood forest, the outer wood gets soft as the inside does as it decays, and bears can bite through that more readily. You think that, oh, beech and maples are harder trees than poplars. Well, not when it comes to the outer layer after a certain fungus starts working on them. And by the way, woodpecker holes, most woodpeckers make round holes. One does not. It has a peak on top. And that woodpecker has a peaked head. It's the pileated woodpecker, very distinctive holes. And if you go to a tree, especially they love American beech trees, if you go to a tree and find an older hole made by pileated and you scratch on the trunk with a stick, maybe you'll have a woodpecker appear, maybe a flying squirrel. But in Algonquin, the northern saw-whet owl often will have its young raised in a pileated hole. And one year we had 3 nests in just a small area along Highway 60. That's the adult, of course, and here's what a young one looks like. Very different looking owls. Of course, summer is a time that there's lots of young birds around, and birds, unlike mammals, in the majority of species, which about 95% in birds, both male and female help raise the young. In mammals, and 90% of all mammals, only the female does. So birds are the ultimate caregivers, it seems, and loons are no exception to that. And by the way, when a baby loon, a chick, gets hungry riding on the parent's back, it nibbles, at least from my observations, nibbles on the back feathers, telling the adult it's time to go for a dive and feed it. One of my favorite habitats in summer to visit is these northern peatlands. Most of them are by nature, by definition, they are fens, poor quality fens because of lower nutrient load. If there's moving water going through them, it's a fen or groundwater. True bogs only have rainfall bringing in nutrients. So these are primarily fens. But there's one fen in eastern Algonquin Park that's a secret fen. I can't tell you where it is. You know, I have to do terrible things to you if I did. But I go there. It's a bit of a bushwhack, but you get in there and there's lots of orchids like rose begonias. There's lots of carnivorous flowers, brownleaf sundew, for example. The giant carnivorous plant, pitcher plant, with these great vase-like leaves that hold water. They have hairs pointing down. When an insect is enticed and starts walking down, it can't walk back out. It hits a curved part inside where the hairs end, and it's smooth and slippery, and down they slide in the water where they drown. Fantastic. But there's, and of course, when the leaves are young, by the way, the plant secretes enzymes into the water to digest the food. But as the leaf gets mature, the plant stops making enzymes, and a whole diversity of microorganisms does the work for the flower, breaks down the animals. But if you look inside pitcher plant leaves, you sometimes find living grubs that have adapted to survive in that bath. And one is a type of flesh fly. Here's the larvae, and it lives in there. The egg is laid by the adult fly, and the larvae devours the insects that drown in that soup. See all the breathing tube, the trachea going through this really neat grub. I mentioned orchids in these fens. There's lots of rose begonias. Grass pink is another common one. And in this one fen only, there are hundreds of this beautiful white orchid, the white fringed orchid. The only spot is found in the park. And last time I was there, I counted 600 plus blooms of it. Phenomenal. It's a stunning flower. Most white flowers tend to be night pollinated, but studies on this plant have not shown that. Bit of a mystery about its pollinators. But when I was taking photographs of the book, I was looking at different individuals for artistic reasons. And I saw this one, and I'm staring at it in my macro lens, thinking, that looks familiar. And then I suddenly realized it does look familiar to a piece of art I've seen pictures of. And that art is the scream. Do you see the scream too in this picture? Or am I, again, spending too much time in fens being bitten by deer flies? I don't know. Anyways, I thought that looked like the nice screen. Okay, back to reality, folks. This fan has some really interesting odonates in it. Crimson ringed white faces, here sitting on a rose begonia. It's got the amber wing, spread wing, beautiful damselfly. And the smallest dragonfly in North America, second smallest in the world, the elfin skimmer, is really common. And that's a male with this, they're only, the wingspan, if you see my hands or not, is only like that. And they don't fly in the air. They're down below your knees, flying through the sedges on the bog mat. That's a male. Here's a female, looking just like a bee. Great mimicry here for protection. There's lots of flowers on land, of course. So when you get out of the fens, you'll find flowers growing in the forest sometimes, but mostly in open sunny areas. Most flower in the daytime, but the evening primrose tends to close its petals during sunny days, open as the darkness descends, and lovely scents are released that attracts pollinators. But if you're lucky and go there early in the morning, then often the blooms are still open, and you will see visitors like this tricolored bumblebee, or maybe even a hummingbird coming in for a bit of nectar. Other flowers, of course, also attract pollinators like hummingbirds. Things like this common milkweed, fantastic for seeing diversity of insects. And hummingbirds are neat because they'll go to various flowers, even to fireweed sometimes. But the one flower in Algonquin Park that really attracts hummingbirds occurs, it doesn't start blooming till late July, and by early August, it's abundant. On certain rivers only, like the Petawawa and the Barren River, you'll find cardinal flower. And the only known pollinator through every study done on this plant is the hummingbird. No insect pollinates it. The whole thing is geared and shaped for hummingbirds. It's got the stamens on top that rub pollen onto the bird's head. And after the pollen is gone, the structure changes to a female stigma, and that'll pull pollen off hummingbirds coming back to visit it. And the long spur that holds the nectar requires its long bill and long tongue to access the nectar. What a remarkable bit of coevolution here between the cardinal flower and the hummingbirds. And by the way, the flower blooms at the ideal time because by the end of July, early August, the young hummingbirds are off the nest and trying to get a bit of an extra increase in body weight before they start migrating south. By the end of July, too, the blueberries, of course, are ripening, and they don't attract hummingbirds. They may attract cedar waxwings, but they certainly attract black bears. And a very important late summer item for black bears is indeed the blueberries. It's amazing. They use their tongues and lips to pull the berries off, but they don't get leaf particles and twigs in their system because their droppings, if you see the droppings, never have those plant parts. So they're experts at extracting the berries. And by the way, it's kind of hard to sneak up on a black bear eating blueberries. I don't know how many black bears I tried to sneak up to by sort of bending down low, almost crawling on the ground. But inevitably, they hear or smell your approach and they stand up. Females have larger ears than males do, and they look a little more feminine too as a female bear. But they take a look at you and they run away, just like girls in high school did. When they saw me, they ran away. But yeah, so it's a kind of a hard time, the hard thing to do to get close to a black bear, to get pictures of it eating blueberries. By the way, here's one bear that didn't run away. And well, this was a big brute. He had scars on the back of his neck, I think, from fighting other bears. And he stared me down. So I left. I was the one who lost this staring contest and went away. But he was a bruiser. He was a beautiful, big animal. Speaking of animals that are, that tend to be more shy and hard to get near, the eastern wolf is one of these. And I spent a lot of time trying to make contact with these animals and see them and learn more about them and certainly photograph them. And their biology is fascinating. The pups are born in dens. They're brought by the pack from those dens, usually in late July or so, out to new summer homes. And those homes are often like this. They're often beaver meadows where a pond once stood and a meadow then formed later once the water left. And they love these sites. And the pups are left here. The adults go off hunting and bring back food to them. And the pups are raised here basically through the latter part of summer. I was lucky once. I went to the site a few years ago. I think it was just 3 years ago. Snuck in during the night, and right actually before the sun rose over the hill, so I had to shoot at a very high speed of ISO and a slow shutter speed. But an adult came back, and the typical thing happens: the pups swarm it, tug out the corners of the mouth. The adult regurgitates the food for them, and that's how they're fed. And because the adults and pups meet together regularly, they're called rendezvous sites. And here's at the rendezvous site. And there's actually, I think, two pups in this picture. One is starting to bite the corner of the mouth here, and out came the food. By the way, I call this method of feeding wolf pups meals on heels. How about that for an interesting term? Anyways, what I learned though over the years is that you think the pups are alone at the rendezvous site, but usually, if not always, but usually at least, one adult is within an earshot. And sure enough, one day I called this pup in, and a few minutes later, in came an adult, and then they were gone. At these sites, they do a lot of howling, and they communicate well with us. If you howl, they answer back readily. And one of my favorite things is sneaking in before daybreak, waiting for sunrise, howling and waiting, and just seeing what happens. And often an adult will come in and start howling like this, or a pup will respond. And one of the highlights from a few years ago was, it took me a long time to do this, but finally got into a site. And I actually waded out into a bit of a beaver pond behind some big dead trees for better cover, because I could see an opening where the pups were probably held. And I howled. But first I waited a few hours, and the pups came out. And then when I saw the pups out, I howled. And what did they do? They howled back. This to me is one of my fondest memories of encountering wolves in Algonquin Park. And by the way, they never saw me. They stopped howling. I didn't howl anymore. They went back to playing. They vanished. I snuck back out. I howled later on that day from about maybe a kilometer and a half from where this was, and the whole pack answered back. So it's rewarding to go in and not disturb them, and to know that they're still there carrying on as they would. Lots of flowers in the summer. You get toward the latter part of summer, you get flowers like boneset and also Joe Pye weed. Butterflies love these plants, and you see things like American ladies nectaring on them. The berries on the trees ripen, especially choke cherries, a major food for cedar waxwings. This one's 1 year old. It lacks the red name-giving droplets of barbs on the feathers. And at the age of 2, they start to grow these little red tips into their wings. But they love eating these berries, as do mammals, the eastern chipmunks, and I've seen raccoons as well, and certainly black bears all taking advantage of the bounty. And that brings us to fall, spectacular time of year for beauty. Very few birds over in Maine and Algonquin after fall, and it's a big time for migration. Only a relatively small handful of species, usually about 20 at maximum, are found in the park in winter, usually well below that. Some years only a dozen species can be found. But sapsuckers leave for southern parts, often by the end of August. Broad-winged hawks leave by mid-September, late September, heading down to South America. That's a juvenile, by the way. But a few birds do stay, including our Canada jays, and they stash food. They roll the food in their large mouths. They have a very enlarged salivary gland that coats them with thick saliva, and that saliva sticks that piece of food under bark and so on, and holds it there. And they usually use conifers, usually spruce, or in this case jack pine was being used, but generally a spruce where these particles are hidden. And they store thousands of items. Get into fall, of course, the park is world famous for its beautiful fall colors, especially on the western hillsides where you get maples dominating. And you can see why so many artists go to Algonquin Park to record these fall colors. Really nature is the artist. People are not. People are just, copying nature basically. And the beauty we see. The fall is also the time for the rut of the moose, the mating season. And my very first book, 1991, was on the moose. I spent a lot of time calling in bulls and looking at this season in particular. And it's spectacular. Those antlers are used to impress other bulls and certainly impress the females. And once contact is made, the female will not mate generally for several days. And during that time, if a larger bull comes along, it can displace a smaller bull. And this female here chose really well. She chose a very mature bull in his prime. They actually just finished mating. She was lying down, having a cigarette. Moose don't smoke, but lying down, he was protecting her. And look at the ears. I learned from this photograph, or while taking the photograph, that when the ears go back on a big bull like this, he's going to charge you. And he almost got me. I was in a bog here, and he almost ran me down. And I was lucky to get away. But I learned a lesson. So I bought a bigger telephoto lens to work farther away from the moose for the moose book. By the end of summer, you start seeing these spectacular displays of spider webs. You never realize how many spiders are out there until you see dew covering those webs at dawn. These are sheet web spiders. They have a different format to the web, and they were just abundant by the end of summer. And some are quite, they're beautiful works of art as well. And of course, frosts then appear in the scene, and they add another dimension of beauty to the landscape as well. With the frost, by the way, comes the ripening of wild raisin, very common shrub on waterways through Algonquin, and a major food source for migrating birds. Everything from American robins and hermit thrushes and Swainson's thrushes, down to warblers like yellow-rumped and black-throated blue, and even sparrows like Lincoln sparrows, a northern sparrow, will eat these fruits. And in no time at all, it's amazing how fast these fruits are stripped off the shrubs, and they're gone by October. There's none left at all. With the latter part of autumn, northern ducks start migrating through, like these red-breasted mergansers that do not nest in the park. Only commons and hoodeds do. These only appear sometimes in late spring, but more commonly in the autumn on their way down farther south. But hooded mergansers, they remain in the park right till freeze up. They're pretty hardy ducks. Of course, as you get to late fall, beavers get extremely active, storing food for the winter, and become very day active as well. You know, they go up on shore, they cut down a variety of saplings and drag them down. They work really hard at this time of year. But this one's cut down speckled alder, and it's not a major food source. They thrive on the bark, for example, of poplars, trembling aspen, large-tooth poplars. They often add these other ones to the top of the food pile to hold the good stuff down below the water, so when ice forms, they're not wasting good food on top. Very industrious. So here's a food pile here, and often speckled alder lines the top, or even branches they've chewed the bark off. They keep going as long as they can, right till freeze up. And in fact, in late November, you get ice forming overnight frequently, but it's fairly thin ice. And in the morning, you'll hear a crunch, crunch, crunch on these ponds as beavers break the ice. Have you ever wondered, how do beavers break the ice to have these trails going to the land or to their food pile until the ice gets too thick to break? How do they do it? How do beavers break the ice? Well, it's not with little drinks and sandwiches. They don't break the ice that way. Beavers break the ice on the back of their heads, and they come up right at daybreak, usually, or shortly after daybreak, and they smash through the ice until it gets too thick eventually to do. But they want to bring as much food in as possible, and they keep breaking the ice then right through until it gets too thick to break. But eventually, all the ponds freeze over, very thick ice by late November, and then into December, the larger lakes have ice encroaching in their center part, and they eventually freeze over too. And as they do, any ducks remaining, like common goldeneye, passing through from the boreal forest, vanish. And then eventually, as this beautiful landscape changes on the shore with the snow and so on, ice will eventually cover the entire lake. This is Radiant Lake, by the way, in early December, and ice was finally, going to cover the entire lake at sunrise here. That brings us to winter, the final season. Beautiful season for the landscape, coating of snow. The mammals that are active have very thick coats of hair and look at their best, like this red fox, for example. Snowshoe hares have turned white for the winter, partly for camouflage, but also white hair is about 26% more efficient at retaining body heat then dark areas, because the hair has vacuoles with air inside them instead of pigments. And hollow windows and hollow hairs do the same thing. They hold back the heat much better. Moose have finished their mating, of course. They've lost a lot of weight during the process. The males have lost up to 10% of the body weight, and they keep devouring plants. The antlers are no longer needed, and by late December, early January, the big bulls that are bred have lost them completely. They fall off and then grow anew the next year. Moose have incredible legs and hip joints for getting through deep snow. They can, they can really lift their legs up. Unlike us, that have to push our legs through, they can raise their legs up as high as their shoulders to get through snow. Some animals walk on top of the snow. Rough grouse, for example, grow snowshoes every autumn, and these snowshoes are scales on the sides of their toes that keep them on top of the snow, allow them greater mobility than as they walk around. Resident birds include barred owls in years when small mammals are present in good numbers. And in some years, great gray owls appear. We always thought these were northern birds coming down from the boreal forest, but actually, over the years, we found several nesting pairs. So some of these winter records could be local birds that didn't go south. The Canada jays, of course, are surviving on their stored food in part. And here's a photograph that I'm really proud of. It was taken in late February, a few years ago. And what it is Canada jay starting to yawn, and out came a pellet of cherry pits. This bird, the previous fall, there was a huge crop of choke cherries. This Canada jay stored choke cherries and knew where they were. In a late February, retrieved them. And there's the evidence. It's really the first photograph, according to Dan Strickland, that really shows that stored food is being used by the adults too, to get them through the winter. Oh, by the way, some silly stuff here. Canada jays have declined dramatically in Algonquin Park. 50% of the population on the western side now from what it was 50 years ago. And I just always wondered, what if Canada jays bred with spruce grouse? What would the young look like? Would they look like this? Or would they look like this? Amazing what Photoshop can do, and a silly mind as well. Anyways, we'll get through that nonsense. The best place in Algonquin Park to see birds in winter is certainly, I'm just turning a light on here. I can see myself fading in the darkness, and I got to get a light on here. I'll turn on this thing here, and I'll turn on this one here. Hopefully, yeah, that should be a little better. There, I can. There. Anyway, there. So I am here. Are these northern fringes of coniferous trees, because they have cones, and also the coniferous trees offer shelter for birds to spend the night in. And in winter in Algonquin, you can have very few cones and very few birds, or some years you'll have massive crops of cones, and then you'll have thousands of crossbills, ranging from white-winged crossbills, generally on the smaller cones, and red crossbills on the larger cones like white pines. But in some years, you've got small-billed red crossbills from the Rocky Mountains coming east, and they will go to the cones that their bills can open, the smaller cones like spruce and tamarack and so on. Here are red crossbills, by the way, with a larger bill. This is the western type with smaller bills. And you can see the amazing cross mandibles they have for prying open the scales sideways. They open the bill sideways on a cone. The tongue goes inside to extract the seeds. Now, these crossbills, there's a small-billed one, by the way, small-billed female, are great for prying open scales on cones, but not so good for picking up grit from the ground to add to their gizzard to grind up those seeds. And how do they do it? They use their tongues to pull up pieces of grit. By the way, one of the best spots for seeing birds in Algonquin Park in winter is at the Visitor Center feeder. And there you'll have a spectacular show of evening grosbeaks. And that's the only bird, by the way, I've seen that can actually chase away blue jays. You know how blue jays tend to be bullies and chase away other birds? Well, the tides are turned when evening grosbeaks are at a feeder. And it's always great to go there and you see this spectacular display of color, blue and yellow, and you've got purple finch, you have raspberry color as well, and so on. The winter is very hard on wolves. About half the wolf population dies every year, largely in winter during starvation, or also accidents caused by mishaps with prey and so on, but half the population dies. But moles make a kill, by the way. They feed not only themselves, but a plethora of other animals. Ravens in winter depend largely on wolf kills. And in recent years, bald eagles have become very common, and they will scavenge through the winter. I love this moment where this bald eagle seems to be directing his minions, that are coming to scavenge as well. And in recent years, golden eagles have been increasing in population farther north, and more sightings are occurring in the park as well. By the way, other animals scavenge, including some of the mustelids, some of the weasels, including mink, and marten and fisher will certainly go to a carcass and scavenge. So wolves really help drive the winter ecology in Algonquin Park and certainly parts farther north as well. And winter, of course, will eventually come to an end. You start getting hoarfrost on trees by waterways. The poplar buds pop open and they provide food for ruffed grouse. And then eventually spring fades into summer, we get our canoes out and the cycles begin again. Algonquin Park is a tremendously rich and diverse place. It's a place of great beauty where you have these incredible floral shows going on every year. You have incredible activity of animals, from the sun coming up at dawn, where you might get a bull and moose in the rut waiting across a shallow pond to look for a mate. Or at sunset, you start getting activity of the nocturnal animals, including a tiny damselfly, the evening bluet, that only comes out after the sun goes down. Here it's riding on a little spent pine pollen flower in Sec Lake in the park. And of course, at night, you've got the wonderful chorus of sounds ranging from spring peepers in spring right now to barred owls through the summer, the whoo, 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 beautiful rolling calls of barred owls. Wow. The wild sounds of common loons, of course, alive in the night. Some animals tell amazing secrets to each other, sometimes shocking, it seems. A couple of river otters here. But there are so many sounds, including the haunting wolf howls that really stir our spirits. And, there's always something new to be seen. Every time I go to Algonquin, there's something new. For example, my last trip there was a week and a half ago. I'm down in Point Pelee right now, enjoying birds. I was in the park a week and a half ago, Barron Canyon. There's a peregrine falcon sitting on the far side of the canyon, right here. So it's taken from one side to the other side of the canyon. And the bird made several forays out, looking for birds down below. Didn't catch any. I was hoping for the peregrine to make a kill in front of me, but it didn't. But, that was exciting seeing that. But I came across two Canada jays. One was started to shake its wings and beg for food. Then came another adult, same behavior. Note, these birds have no bands on their legs. This is Eastern Algonquin, in by the Barron Canyon area. And Dan Strickland told me that what happened is those birds probably have fledged young already out, and they do this begging thing, and that may stimulate one to get food for the young. And so already in Algonquin, as of a week ago, Canada jays had fledged young off the nest. And we're canoeing Sec Lake in the evening after that wonderful day in the Barron Canyon, and a male called Merganser had a female to the right here. Another male landed, and it put the run on it. So much to see, and always something new. That's another whole thing about the park too that I've learned to appreciate over the years, is that there's another whole world to it, not just the nature itself and habitats, but this interaction, and often in a very abstract way. For example, a beaver swimming through the reflections of dead trees, or a dragonfly, here a shadow darner hovering over moving water, or whirligig beetles swirling around, creating great patterns on the water's surface. That's a pond, and these ones are floating silently and still, while these ones are moving around very quickly. Or rock tripe on a rock face, or ants under a rock, or snow falling on a windy day in a black spruce forest. It's the world of abstracts, and such a beautiful world of abstracts too. When I was young, I heard about this famous pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and I thought, what nonsense. Well, there truly is a pot of gold, and to me, that pot of gold is Algonquin Provincial Park. If you go there, be sure to bring a handout with you for friendly animals that may join you on your expedition. And that's it. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak to you. And hopefully you've enjoyed some of the images of the park.
Great.
Oh, by the way, we have a Facebook page, Nature by Runtz, where Britt and I share and some of our stories and adventures too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will exit the screen share.
Yeah.
And I will now, I suppose, if there's time, take questions from you or whatever.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
What photographic gear do you use?
I use a camera.
Good.
I apologize for that. I use a variety of lenses. I love macro work. I think most of all working with insects and flowers and the small things. And I use Canon equipment. Every kind of line of camera equipment is good, especially when you go to the professional lenses. That's the key. And for the telephoto stuff, I have. Well, I call the money lens, a 600 millimeter massive thing that weighs, I think, 10 pounds or something. But I love using that for some of the more distant things.
Yeah.
But I got a variety of lenses, and they're all the prime lenses, the top lenses. So they cost a lot, but they give you, well, nature is so perfect. And people who are photographers often take a lot of, like to get a lot of accolades for their photographs. And people will say, what a beautiful photograph. There's no such thing as a beautiful photograph. It's a beautiful flower or a beautiful mammal or bird. And all people like myself are doing are recording it, just capturing what's there. And so, it's a strange thing I find where I don't like being called a photographer. I'm a naturalist. I'm a naturalist who likes looking at nature and trying to record nature as it should be recorded. And those prime lenses really do the job properly.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's perfectly.
And Michael also has an eye for the detail to bring out those abstracts and events. It's really wonderful. Any other questions?
Yep.
I see one in the chat, and I think that's a thank you from Don Farrell. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you're most welcome.
Michael, how's the park responding to, we've really noticed that it's being used a lot more heavily now after COVID. It's harder to get in even in the summers. Yeah. That has an effect on it over time too. It is such a large area though. That's a fortunate.
Well, that's this large area, and really the footprint of us on it is more seasonal. And you get in the off seasons, and the thing is, people think, well, you have to go way back in and off the highway to see nature. And I certainly have been way back in off the highway in remote parts of Algonquin, and I see as much activity pretty well within the highway corridor. If I am looking for things, I'll put the canoe in before daybreak, maybe Costello Creek, and do a paddle, and I'll encounter beavers and otters and sometimes moose and so on. And there's been wolves killing moose and deer along Highway 60 and so on. Natural cycles occur. And although there are an awful lot of people, the actual area of the park they occupy is rather small, relatively, and also it's a rather temporary basis. And so overall effect of humans. Now, logging may be a little different as well, where there's an effect, certainly on some species, a negative effect, but in others a positive effect. Things like moose and deer like younger growth. And there's no doubt that logging roads and even selective cutting of forest provides a little more browse for them. And they are food for, moose calves are a major food for black bears. And certainly deer and moose are food for wolves. And therefore logging may, and again, I stress may enhance the habitat slightly in favor of the ungulates, and therefore they're predators. So some benefits, some don't. And overall, the logging is done in a better format in Algonquin than many other areas. You go outside the park, you see a lot of clear cutting. And in Algonquin, clear cutting is very rare and only used in rare circumstances.
Anybody else with questions or comments?
I got a question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you just fine.
Obviously. So what are the birds like down in Point Pelee? Should I go yesterday?
Oh, today, oh, God. We only arrived here a day and a half ago. Yesterday was really slow.
Yeah.
But today, oh my God, there were thousands of birds in reverse migration, leaving the point at daybreak, heading south. And apparently Pelee Island had a mass movement of probably 30,000 birds estimated flying south again. It's called reverse migration.
Yeah.
It happens in pulses sometimes, or a big movement occurs, and then the birds decide at dawn, well, no, maybe went too far, and they go back a bit.
Yeah.
But they'll return again.
Yeah.
And this morning was one of those days. It was unbelievable seeing bird flock after flock after flock fly over the point going south. And there were like 30 or so. And we saw individual indigo buntings. We saw a flock of 40 cedar waxwings. We saw 3 bobolinks, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And it was remarkable. But in the woods themselves, there's still a lot of birds. Big change in bird numbers today. And so many exciting birds like hooded warblers.
Yeah.
So it was, and one of the highlights today was, to me, not a rare bird, but it was a rare sight. There was a gray catbird we saw just before we left the park to come here for the presentation that was leucistic. It was almost all pure white with some black in the tail.
Yeah.
And, some people would say it was a partial albino, but there's no such thing as a partial albino.
Yeah.
Albino is 0 pigment.
Yeah.
They can't produce dark pigments. Well, leucism, some people say leucism, but I think it's leucism, means they can manufacture dark pigments, but they can't transport those dark pigments to the proper locations. And so you get a lot of variation. It could be a white patch on a bird or a mammal, or it might be largely. This bird was like this mammal, I'm so excited. Gray catbird. It's not a cat, it's a bird. Gray catbirds. This was so beautiful. And I can't wait to download the photographs after the presentation is done and have a look at them. What a neat looking bird. Holy cow. Neat looking bird.
Robert, you had a question. Did you unmute?
Right. Can you hear me now? I should be unmuted.
Absolutely.
You're good.
Do you have your camera mounted on your canoe in front of you so you have your hands free except when you want to take the picture by any chance?
It's funny. In the early days when I shot film and I was shooting slow speed, I did the moose book mostly on Kodachrome 25 ISO, and my high speed film was Fujichrome 50 ISO. Wow, I had to use a tripod. So yes, in the canoe in my early stages, I would use a tripod. But now with the digital cameras and the higher ISOs, I don't go that high. Apparently, to some people, I shoot like 640 or 500 ISO usually. To me, that's holy cow, that's fast compared to the film I was using. And with the prime lenses, you shoot, the image stabilizing is good too. So I don't use a tripod anymore, except for macro, because my 180 Canon macro lens has no stabilizer and therefore has to have a nice solid steady base. Although sometimes I'll lie on the ground and just put a stone or something under the end of the lens and shoot that way for flowers. But I tend to use a tripod now only. Now, mind you, that 10-pound lens I carry around today all day is getting pretty heavy. I think it's gaining weight over the years. And either I got to pay Britta more, have her carry my gear for me, or start using a tripod again.
It's heavy.
I just want to take this chance to thank you very much for your inspiring talk. That really was exciting.
Oh, thank you.
Do you think that all of those birds at Pelee are going to make their way up here to Stratford in the next couple of days? So that
I would think so. It's
trying
supposed to be warm tonight and a slight southerly flow of air. So watch out the next day or two. There'll be lots of birds coming up because it's been so slow here. I was lucky we came down and we were told by people, we've been here for a week now and it's hardly anything we see. Like we see like one warbler of one species, every hour or something. And today was a lot different. A lot of flycatchers came in today. There was a big push of least flycatchers. And kingbirds were here and so on. But again, most birds seem to leave, but some stayed, and there'll be a lot more coming. I can't wait for dawn tomorrow morning to see what it's like down by the tip. But the people, holy cow, it's crazy here. For those that know Pelee, you got the small parking lot near where that tram goes down, whatever they call it, down the tip. I came in at 6 this morning, And that thing was filled up, and the big parking lot above was half filled at 6 a.m.
Yeah,
Oh, I got unbelievable. Go down to the tip. You can't see the tip for all the people.
Yeah.
The ones that got in earlier went down there first, of course.
yeah.
Yeah, it's and some friends of ours are here sharing this Airbnb. They came down at something like 7:30, and they couldn't get down to the center. They had to park at Delorier and
Oh my
walk down from Delorier. Oh, it's crazy. So if anybody's coming down to Peely and you want to go down to the tip area early in the morning, you gotta be in there by 6 in the morning.
I was there this week and I arrived, I think around 8 o'clock,
Yeah.
and I couldn't get my car anywhere near the visitor center. I had to park at White Pines.
And now it's worse as we're getting more toward the prime time for migration. There's
Yeah.
more and more people. Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
So are you taking enough pictures now there so that in a bit of time you can come back again and give us a presentation on Point Pelee?
Oh, I could easily, yeah. I used to work here for as a naturalist too for a few years. So I have some summer things, and yeah, I would be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Or any
Mhm.
topic in nature you want, well, I can't say any topic in nature. I know nothing, well, I shouldn't say nothing about fish, but very little about fish. I tend to deal more with things above the water than under the water. But yeah, I'd be happy to do a lot of different
Yeah.
stuff. And I'm really thinking about doing a new book on wildflowers too. So if you want to talk on wildflowers, because so many people think that plants are boring, but honestly, I find wildflowers and plants in general
Mhm.
as fascinating as I do animals.
Yeah,
And so, anyways, I shouldn't talk like that, but I'd be happy to do another talk for
Yeah.
you sometime.
Yeah, thank you.
it's a pretty exciting world we live in, that's for sure.
That's
Any
for
more
sure.
questions? No, okay. Well, Michael, I would really like to thank you for doing this talk tonight. It was a wonderful talk, wonderful images, and I'm sure I'm ready to go back to Algonquin sooner than what I was planning previously. That's one of my trips I'm gonna make this summer.
Excellent. Good, good. Well,
Yeah,
yeah. if
it's
you
a
do-
wonderful spot.
Yep, it is for sure.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day tomorrow. Everybody's
Yep.
cheering.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And nice to, hopefully, if you see me down in Peely, come and say hello.
Yeah, okay, you take
All
care.
right. Yeah. Okay. Bye for now, folks.
Bye for now.
That was great.
Yeah. All right, so that's, is there anything anyone else wants to add to our meeting before we depart? Words of wisdom? That was a great talk.
6 new
Yeah,
warblers for me today.
yeah.
We have this recorded, right? We've had the presentation recorded.
Yes, sir,
Would
I
you like
have
it
it
again?
recorded. I'm just